I was running like 8-minute pace for the last 3, so I was like, they're probably not running 6 flat pace. All right, I am back from Santa Barbara. The air quality in the last week was just absolutely terrible from the Thomas fire, which was quite devastating on the eastern part of Santa Barbara. Yeah, everybody on campus was wearing a mask for a few days, and then I think the tipping point for the administration was at 2:30 in the morning one day, we got an emergency evacuation notice saying that we all need to evacuate immediately. And that ended up being a false alarm, but a lot of resident assistants went through halls telling students to pack a bag, and people in the neighboring town left or prepared to leave before it was explained that that was a false alarm. And it was a week full of stress for everybody. Conditions were just terrible, and a lot of people had friends and family that were in harm's way of the fire. So eventually we were allowed to go home, and our finals were postponed until after our winter break. So for 3 days in there, I had to do my training runs on a treadmill. I did an 8-mile run one day, and then a 10-mile run the next. And then the day after that, I did just a 5-mile run before my race. And then the next day, I left and went to San Luis Obispo, which was about 2 hours north, where the air quality was a little bit better, to run my 50K. So myself and a few friends arrived at the race at about 7:15, 45 minutes before the start. And I didn't really prepare that well for this race. In the past, I've usually been very organized with what I was going to do with nutrition and all that. But there were a few things that I wasn't really all that prepared for. For example, I was out of Tailwind, which I normally use for my races. In fact, I only had about 3 doses of Tailwind. So I did use it, but not for every segment of the race, which was interesting. The other thing was, I thought I had oatmeal to eat for breakfast, and it turned out that I did not have that, so I ended up eating nothing but Lara bars for breakfast. I ate like 3 of them, so that may not have been ideal. I actually eat quite a few bars, probably not the healthiest thing, but that's kind of what I do. So the race started at 8, and there were a number of different distances for the race. There was an 8K and a 13K and a 25K, which is what most people ran. Because the course was essentially 2 unique loops that you do twice for the 50K and once for the 25K. So most people did the 25K. But since everyone started at once, I didn't really know who was in what race. So I was trying to be really patient and not go out with anyone that I thought was running too fast. That being said, I still ran something like 7:20 for the first 2 miles, which were rather rolling on gravel. Not super hilly. The second mile was like 43 feet of elevation gain, but that was like a 7:20. So running smoothly and quickly, but not going too fast. And then you sort of go up and over a big peak, and then another peak, and then those are the 2 things that you do twice. So 4 peaks. One was 1,300 feet tall, and the other was about 1,000 feet tall. And of course, you start on the beach, so started at 0 feet sea level. So the first loop went fine. I felt really good, just kind of chatting with some folks. Met a guy from New York that was running the 50K. I didn't really know he was running the 50K at the time, but he did kind of have a lot of hydration gear, so I was pretty sure he was in my race. So we talked for a while, and the first loop was over quick enough. It was about 7.8 miles, and I kind of made a mistake with my nutrition. I asked for water in my bottle, but I think what happened is somebody poured in electrolyte mix, and I poured my Tailwind packet on top of that. So I had a really sugary mixture for about an hour, which was kind of okay. I didn't really mind it that much. It was some sort of Cliff stuff and the Tailwind as well. So the second loop went fine. We were running kind of with this guy that was in the 25K. We ended up going over the peak and then down the other side and then back up the peak, and then the long descent back to the start-finish area, we really bombed that. So that section was quite fast, even though it was rather technical single track. So we were back at the start-finish, and we had to run back on the flat rolling bluffs for a while. And that's the point where I was kind of starting to feel pretty tired. I thought I was going to be moving slower than I was, but I still ran something like a 750 on the bluffs. So the guy Nick that I had been running with, he had a full-on pack. I just had a handheld, so I was able to get through the aid station quicker than him, but he still didn't leave that far behind me. And as I would look over my shoulder on the bluffs, I would see that he was closing on me. So I was pretty sure that he was going to pass me at some point around mile 20. However, once we left the bluffs and started climbing the mountain, which was about 1,300 feet of climbing in 3 miles, I started to drop him a little bit. And it's also at that point that I saw the only person in front of me that was in my race. I didn't know he was the only person in front of me in the 50K at the time because I didn't know who had finished and who was still running the 50K. But I ended up passing him and he was totally beat. I don't know where he finished, but so I got past him. I thought Nick was kind of chasing me, but Nick started to fall back a little bit as I went up the peak, and I felt really bad. And the other thing that was interesting is as we got higher and higher on the peak, the air quality started to get quite bad, and I was pretty sure San Luis Obispo was going to be perfect air quality because I'd been monitoring the air maps, but it turned out that it was not that good, and I thought I was going to get to the top of that peak, run back to the start-finish area at about mile 24, and the race director was going to say something like, oh, the race is canceled, the air quality's gotten too bad. But that didn't end up happening. Once I got off the peak and started running down, the air got a little bit better, and I figured everyone at the start-finish area was going to know nothing of it, and I was probably going to end up running the last bit. So I got back to the start-finish area, and I didn't see Nick. I didn't see anyone behind me for that matter. And I got out of the aid station before anyone else came in, which was my goal. And the last 8 miles was an out and back. It was the one I'd done earlier. And I started to feel really bad. And it was really tempting to just sort of say, you know, this is it. This isn't my day. I'm going to walk in the last 8 miles, finish the race for the heck of it. And that's normally what I realize that I've done in my races. When I start to feel really, really terrible, I assume that I'm always going to feel really, really terrible. But you always hear people talk about going in and out of rough patches in these ultras. And if you just stick through it long enough, that eventually you will come out the other side and feel better. So even though I felt awful, I was kind of just trying to shuffle really slowly up the mountain. And that's kind of what I did. And I was looking over my shoulder the whole time for Nick or anyone else behind him to come pushing up past me in the last 6 miles or so and take the race from me. In fact, there was one point where the trail was long and exposed enough that I was able to look back and I was able to see somebody chasing me. Again, probably about a half mile, if not a little bit more than that away from me. In fact, I couldn't tell who it was, but I could see somebody on the climb up behind me. So once I got over the peak, I neared the out and back, and when I got to the out and back, I looked at my watch, noted the time, and started running back in the other direction. And about 2.5 minutes later, I passed the next guy. So I figured I probably had about an 8-minute lead or so, because it would take him, say, 2 minutes to get to the out and back, and then another 2.5 minutes to get back to where I was, and then at that point, I'd have already gone a little bit further. So I pushed back up to the peak, and when I got to the peak and was headed for the final 3-mile descent to the finish, I looked back one more time. I saw him probably about half mile away, and I ran as hard as I could down the hill. This was the first time in a few races that I hadn't worn compression socks, so I wasn't sure what would happen there. And I did feel my calves like starting to cramp up a little bit, but I don't think it happened any more than normal. I was just trying to make sure I stayed on my feet. I did run something like a 7:58 on the downhill, which was kind of technical single track. I feel like it was fairly fast, and I knew that as long as the guy behind me wasn't running 6-minute pace, I'd be fine if I could stay on both my feet. So I ran down as fast as I could without falling, and I was able to win the race. So it was a really good training run for Sean O'Brien in Western States. The course was actually quite a bit long. According to my GPS, it was 32.6 miles, so that's even better for training for Sean O'Brien and training for Western States. And I think the biggest thing about this race that I see as a victory for myself was I was able to have that low patch and kind of push through it. Even though I was running super slowly, I split like an 11:58 mile in one of the uphills and then like a 13 something. But once we got back to the descent, I was able to find my legs again. So I didn't have a pity party. I didn't start walking it in, and it was just a really good day. Even though the time wasn't that good, it was like 5:26, it was a really tough course, and I'm happy that I was able to battle it out for the win there. So since this wasn't a key race, I should talk about recovery. The day after the race, I drove home. It was about an 8-hour drive. It was extremely nice to get out of the smoke. And the day after that, I did just a 3 to 4 mile run, and really easily and super slowly. I felt super tired. And then this morning I was able to go for a 7-mile run, and I felt great, pretty much back to normal. So from here on out, we're just going to keep working on high mileage, maybe doing 1 speed work session a week. Again, I think it's really important to always work on speed work. I'm not the fastest guy out there, and I think it's something that you should never stop trying to improve with, is your 5K, 10K pace and that sort of thing. And now that I'm home in Northern California, I'm only about 2 hours from the Western States course, and some of the lower elevations don't have any snow, and the trails are still runnable. So I might make a trip possibly to Forest Hill to do some runs on the Cal Streets or something like that to get sort of used to the course and to prepare myself for the Western States 100, which is the big goal. I'm still blown away that I'm into that race and really excited. I have to figure out how to get my volunteer hours, but other than that, I'm good to go. So I'm really excited. We're going to keep moving on and preparing for Western States and Sean O'Brien. I'd like to have a really good race at Western States. So that's the game plan. We'll keep training. I hope your training and racing is going really well. I know it's winter in a lot of your homes, and there's probably a lot of people taking an off season, which is great. But thanks so much for following along, and I'll see you in Squaw.